Hello and welcome back to my channel, TorAthena, which I know you haven't seen me for like a hot minute, and I said I was going to do a video every day in October and then I didn't, but shut up, I've been busy. But leading up to Verbuary, which is the writing event I run in February, I've had the most perfect and wonderful opportunity to interview a writer before that even starts. So it's great. I can plug his work, I can plug my work, it works out. So I'd like to introduce you to Lex Jones, a very, very well accomplished author. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you for asking me. I'm honored. I'm honored. I'm honored because people who followed me know that I've written a book or two. But
Sure.
I was actually having a look on your Amazon page, and at the moment there's already 27 books on there.
Yeah, they're not all mine. I should point that out. I've got, as of my next one, I'll have 4 books that are just my work, and then I've got work featured in about however many other books. Like an anthology where there's various authors. And
I
then
think you're
one of them's me.
massively underplaying yourself there, because even though the whole pages are every page isn't by you, there's 27 books that you have contributed
Yeah,
towards.
yeah, that's
And
true.
that's
Yeah,
very much an accomplishment. So well done.
thank you.
But like you just said, this book is all your work.
Mm.
And so tell us a bit about it.
Well, it's a collection of short horror stories or ghost stories. Ghost stories being like the catch-all term really for that kind of thing. And whilst I have done a lot of horror stories before featured in other anthologies like the ones we just mentioned, this is the first time I've got a book out that's just mine. So it's like 13 of my stories, a couple of which have been featured in other books before, but the majority of them are brand new things to put just in this book.
That's amazing. And it's called Whistling Past the Graveyard, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I've read, I'll admit, I haven't had a chance to read all of them, but I have had a chance to read some of them. And
Okay.
we do know that this is also a review channel.
Yes.
So I was like, do I be mean and review one of his stories? But I actually honestly loved them.
Oh,
The
thank you.
one I read, which is it's so annoying because it's the hardest one to pronounce, and it's AC43
Yeah, it's a
Ron.
number plate. It's a number plate, so you can't be. It's meant to
Of
look like
course it
Acheron.
is.
It's meant to look like Acheron. The river of the dead in the Greek mythology. It's meant to look like. Like
Ah,
when people try and spell people, knobheads, try and spell a name on a number plate. Like that. It's meant to look like that. So
of course it's a license plate because for anyone obviously who hasn't read the book yet, this is about a man who, well, what I love about it, it's almost like a forgotten urban legend meets
mm,
Silent Hill, and I really like that. And it's about a man who is driving down the road, and everything disappears and he's lost, and he's looking for a way back to what he knows. And it was incredible. The whole thing I was reading, I was like, I just want to know how it ends. I was like, how could he honestly end this in a way that it satisfies me? And it does. I'm obviously not going to spoil it for anyone, but I really liked it because that was
no,
one of,
thank you.
I enjoyed every single one I read so far, but that was the first one that I actually couldn't stop reading. I was
Mm,
I was listening to that because I was having it read out to me by this program I have while I was getting ready for this interview. And one of the reasons why I was late is because I was like, I have to find out how this finishes. So that's definitely got the Lucy seal of approval. And it also shows as well that you've put a lot of thought into even just that one story.
mm.
So where do you get the inspiration? Do you get struck by a muse with every single story, or are some of them really hard to come across?
Yeah, it depends. It's kind of like 2 ways that I come across them. So some of them, it's just I'll get an idea of about an event like whatever however we're going to pronounce it. Let's call it Acheron. That one, that was literally I was driving home from London from a work event, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning on a weeknight, and it was foggy, and I must have driven. It was one of those where the fog was such that you could only see about 50 feet in front of you and 50 behind you. And I must have driven for about 45 minutes and not seen a single other vehicle at all. Now, it's quite possible there were cars further ahead, but I just couldn't see them because of the darkness and the fog. And that idea kind of stayed with me and made me think, what if you just kept driving and driving and driving and you just never saw any landmarks, any cars, or anything to give you any idea where you were or how far you'd gone? And it just kind of came from that. But then there's other ideas where I'll think to myself, I really want to write something set in a lighthouse, for argument's sake, and then I'll try and think of an idea that fits that. And those are much harder because you're kind of trying to force the creativity there rather than something just coming out of nowhere. So they're a bit of a mix of both, really.
What was, you know what? I'm so unprofessional. I haven't muted my phone. Let me just do that now. It's not a TorAthena interview if I haven't messed it up in some way. I was just holding in a burp while you're releasing your creative juices then, and I'm just holding in a burp. But back to the question I was about to ask. So which was the hardest story for you to write in this particular book out of the 13 stories?
Oh, there is one in it called The Shape of the Bow, and it's set on a fishing boat in sort of Victorian times. It's sort of deliberately vague. It's blatantly not now. It's like at least a century ago. But in doing that, I'm one of those people who I like to get every little detail of it right. So I knew nothing about a fishing boat, or it's actually a merchant ship, to be honest, but I knew nothing about like the terms for a boat, you know, but I didn't want the characters saying things like pull that rope, you know, and it needs to be the correct term. Like there's did you ever watch the sketch show that Mitchell and Webb did a few years ago? Because they did a sketch on that where it's meant to be set in a hospital. It's like a serious drama set in a hospital, but it's where the writers haven't bothered to do any research. So you've got like this proper serious ER style drama, and the doctor's running about saying, give him that thing that makes his blood thicker. And they're just not using any of the right terms, and it's hilarious. But that I hate that when I'm reading something and you can kind of tell that they haven't quite bothered. So I had to spend...
Yeah, that's most of my books.
I'm sure it's not. I had to kind of do an awful lot of research about boat terms and you know, shipping lanes and you know, what sort of distance, how long would it take to get across the sort of distance to traveling and all that kind of thing. And I researched loads of that stuff to put into it, which made it a bit like an assignment rather than just, and this was just for the framework, just for the fact of it being set on a boat, you know. But then when it went for an edit, the editor took most of that stuff out.
Oh, so, no.
Because it wasn't relevant, which I agree. You know, I hate those books where I've been reading for 40 pages and they've spent ages telling me what the house looks like and what wallpaper it is and what. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Get to the narrative, you know. So I understand why the editor took it all out, but after having done all that time on it, it was a bit of frustration. But it ended up as a leaner story as a result. But yeah, I ended up hating that story after I'd finished writing it.
Oh, I quite enjoyed that one. I liked the fact it was written like a diary because obviously these are 13 short stories, and it's one thing I do like reading anthologies and even writing anthologies is you can try different things with each story.
Sure,
You know,
yeah.
there's no rigidity to it. But was that a particular story then, because you put so much effort into something that was stressing you out? Was that something that you went, I want to write about a Victorian boat of some sort, and that's why you were having to put so much research into it?
Yeah, it's because I knew the story needed to be set on a boat because of the very nature of the story. If I had it set back on land, it wouldn't work because I'm trying to explain it without giving too much of the story away. But the events that happen needs to be on a boat. You need that feeling of isolation and being cut off and miles from anywhere else, and there's just you and everyone else who's on the boat. And so it needed to be on there. But the people in the story would also be doing a job. They don't just happen to be on the boat like a passenger on like the Titanic, for instance, where you don't need the characters in the Titanic talking about boat stuff because they're just passengers. All of that stuff is done by the crew. But on a boat like this, they are the crew. So they are going to be doing the jobs and stuff. So, and in his journal, they're going to be referring to that stuff. So it needed that research doing. Because I'm very much a believer in getting the fundamentals right. You know, I think if you're telling a fantastical story, you can have dragons in it, you can have ghosts, werewolves, whatever. But the fundamental reality has to be grounded and feel like a real place. You know, if you're setting a story in 1850, you can have werewolves, ghosts, whatever you want, but you can't have your main character whip out an iPhone or describe something as being cool or something, because you just lose that grounded straight away. And it's just showing your audience that you've got no respect for them at all. So however fantastical you want things to get, you're grounding of the world you're creating has got to be solid. So if that means you've got to spend 3 weeks reading up on boats, then you've got that's what you've got to do. So it was just a necessity to form the world that story needed to be set in, really.
In the introduction to this book, you wrote about how your granddad kind of was the beginning inspiration to storytelling, and you even said he was much better than you will ever be.
Yeah.
But even just you talking now, you can see not only the knowledge you have in story writing, but the respect you have for it. So I really want to hear something off your granddad, because if he's better than you, his stories must have been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if he was still, we lost him about 10 years ago, unfortunately. So he never actually got to see any of my work published, which is something I'm constantly sort of sad about, because I'd love to have taken the book to him and said, look, I've done this. But I think a lot of it is kind of self-consciousness. Like, I find that when I'm reading, like, I have done quite a few videos and stuff of myself reading my own work. I did quite a few sort of fireside ghost story readings at Christmas and that kind of thing. But I'm always sort of, I've never been into performance, you know. I've never done acting or anything like that. I'm far too self-conscious. I'd get anxiety. I don't do stuff like that. So, and I think you need a lot of that for storytelling, because it's not just, I'm going to sit here and read the words like I would if I'm doing a presentation about science. You know, you've got to be a bit performative. You've got to put voices on. You've got to do sound effects. You've got, you know, and I just can't do that. I just can't push past my own self-consciousness to do that. Whereas he did. He was just masterful at all that kind of thing. So I think that is the difference. So I'm aware of what it is, but I just think, I don't know what would have to change in me to kind of get over that barrier so that I could, you know, be as good as he was at it.
I also think as well, you know, can you really call yourself a writer if you don't suffer from imposter syndrome? So
Probably not. No,
yeah.
no.
So I'm sorry if you've already mentioned it, but I've kind of drawn a blank to the beginning of this interview already. But so these 13 stories, they're all horror. Would you say they're all horror genre?
Yeah, different types of horror, but yeah, they all fit into that genre. Yeah.
Would you class yourself as a horror writer?
Well, this is the thing. People do. I've seen a lot of times that I've been interviewed in magazines or whatever, that term always comes up. But similarly to a lot of authors, really, a lot of the stuff I've written isn't. But I think that's what people kind of know me the most, because most people who read my stuff have read it because they were intending to read someone else's. I'm almost like that support band where you go to see AC/DC, but while you're there's another band performing and you're like, oh, they're good. And it's kind of like, that's sort of how I've got, because I'm in books with Clive Barker, I'm in a book with Adam Neville, I'm in some with Graham Masterton. So people buy these books for these guys, you know, your big boys of horror. And then there's other people in there like me who are like your supporting acts. And then they read them and think, oh, they're good. And then they look up other stuff that I've written. So I'm kind of known through horror. But actually, the 3 novels that I've written that are fully my own books before this collection, none of them are horror.
Oh, really?
The first one is like, oh God, I don't even know what genre you'd call it. It's like a literary fiction fantasy. It's about, it's called Nick and Abe, and it's about God and the devil making a wager with each other to spend a year on Earth as humans to see who knows the most about humanity when you're forced to look at it the way that humans look at it rather than from on high or whatever. And in doing that, it kind of forces them to reevaluate their relationship with each other as father and son rather than these godlike beings. So that's the first book I read.
Well, that sounds amazing.
Well, thank you. That got a really good response, actually. That got some really good reviews. The second book I wrote is a noir crime novel. It's sort of done. A few people have compared it to Sin City. I didn't really see that myself, but I get where they're coming from because it's noir crime fiction and it's gritty. But I think it's got a very different tone to that. I think it's more sort of David Lynchian themes because it's got like it's a bit surreal, you know, where it's never quite supernatural, but it feels just a bit odd.
Yeah.
It's got that kind of a thing. And then my third book was the children's book that I wrote, which is called The Old One and the Sea, which is a illustrated children's book, which is a reimagining of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu stories, which you've got a copy of
I do.
somewhere.
And you know what? I was going to grab it before the interview and it's over there. But that was why I asked, because that is adorable. The cover of that is so cute. And
Yeah, it's
when I'm
beautiful.
looking up anything about you, it's horror this and horror that. And I'm like, where does this fit in? Where does this
Yeah.
adorable little book fit in? But I think it's kind of fun that you do lean into all your creativity. If you have an idea for something or you want to write something, you can. Where I have only ever published horror, and I kind
Yeah.
of feel like I've pigeonholed myself almost.
That's the word, isn't it? You
Yeah.
pigeonhole yourself and think, oh, I'm a horror writer, I can only write horror. But you shouldn't do that. There's absolutely no reason you can't, which is why when I get interviewed and stuff now, if people want to describe me as a horror author, then fine. But it's not a term that I will put in my own bio or anything now, because like you say, I think that pigeonholes you, and then people have that expectation. And then it's also that much harder for you to get anything published which isn't horror then, because you're kind of going in with that expectation of, oh, it's Lucy, this is what she's going to publish, and then it's not.
Well, that's really interesting. So I also haven't asked, when is the book out?
This Friday, I think, as we record, this 29th of January it should be.
That's so exciting. And obviously there'll be links on this video, but just pretend the links don't work. Where can people buy this book from?
Well, if you want the ebook, then it's through Amazon because of the Kindle. But if you want the paperback, then you obviously can get it on Amazon as well. But you'll be able to get that most places that do paperbacks on order, like W.H. Smith's or Waterstones or whatever the US equivalent of those things is. What you tend to find with the paperback is you've been able to get all of my paperbacks from Waterstones, for instance, in the UK. But only one of them ever actually made it onto the shelves because bookshops only have like limited shelf space, and they generally reserve it for people who are way more established than me. But the first book that I wrote got enough interest via people going into Waterstones and asking for it that they ended up having a bit of a stock of it.
Now, you see, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. So if you have people who want to support you, even if they can't afford to buy the book, they should go into a bookshop and ask for it, because if enough people ask for it, it'll get you shelf space.
Yeah, and ordering it in particular, if they do that, it kind of flags up. There's like an algorithm, like, after it hits a certain point of so many people have come in and requested this book, then it kind of flags up as, okay, people want this. So then they start carrying a stock of it. And it might only be a couple of hundred copies spread across the whole, network of their shops. But that's what you want really to get to the bigger sales is you want it in a shop, because the problem with ebooks is not ebooks. The problem with selling them online is that the only people who really find it are people who know that they're looking for it. Yeah. Whereas in a bookshop, you walk in, you see the cover and go, oh, that looks interesting in the crime section. What's that one? And then you take it off the shelf and so on. You don't really catch that audience with online sales. So if you can get it in a bookshop, it's better, but it's very difficult to do that. And you've got to have kind of an established presence, which I am way off. So I got lucky with that first one. But yeah, if anyone is, well, I say that now, you can't even go to a bookshop at the moment, but later in the year, if anyone wishes to buy it later in the year, if you went into Waterstones and asked for it, that would actually benefit me more than getting it off Amazon. But I understand that's probably not a possibility at the moment.
Oh, that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
It's okay.
So I know you're saying you're well off the established writers, but I think a lot of people watching this will feel many ranks below you in the established ladder, myself included. So what advice do you have for anyone who wants to start writing and doesn't know where to start?
Well, the first thing I would say is actually just write your story, your book, whatever it is. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but you'd be surprised how many people immediately start, oh, I want to be a writer, and they start looking at I know plenty of people who've done this. They start looking at how do you get published? How do you get an agent? How do you do this? And they haven't even written a first page yet. And it's like, you're scaring yourself with all the admin. Forget about that. Write your book. And then, it sounds like I'm being a bit gatekeepery with this, but for the love of God, don't just write it and then put it straight onto Amazon as a self-published thing. People are going to pay for this. They deserve better than that. You need to get it edited. And I don't mean giving it your mum to check for spelling mistakes. I mean paying for a proper editor, and yeah, it is going to cost you money to tighten that up. and make it a better book. Because however good you think it is, I guarantee you that first draft isn't. It needs to be tightened up, improved, shortened or lengthened in some bits. You might even have whole characters that don't need to be there. However you're doing it, whether you're sending it to an agent or a publisher, or if you're uploading it yourself, you need to get it edited first. So the first thing you want to do, let's assume you're going down the traditional publishing route, which is what I do. I haven't self-published any of mine stuff because I can't be bothered with the admin side of it, to be honest. Someone else can do that. So, but that does make it kind of difficult because it's like an audition process. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that that product is the best it can possibly be before you are sending it to a publisher, because you've got to bear in mind how many manuscripts are going to land on their desk on a daily basis. And if they even read yours, which they might not, but if they do, they don't want to read something that's bloated, that's full of spelling mistakes, that hasn't been edited, because you're just going to go straight in the bin. So you've got to make it a good prospect. So if they start reading it, they want to keep reading it. And the process that generally happens is you send them a sample chapter. It might not be the first one. And if they like it, they will then ask for a bit more. And if they like that, they will ask for the whole book. If you get that far, you're usually on quite a good stance there, because the chances of them then hating the book and saying, nah, it's still possible, but it's slimmer than from, when they've only read a few pages of it. So, and then from then onwards, their process will be whatever their process is. But to start with, write your book, and then let's say you go in traditional publisher. I would look up what kind of publishers take the work that you've written. What genre is it? So because you're not, if you're contacting romance fiction authors with your new crime novel, publishers, sorry, with your new crime novel, that just shows that you haven't researched what they do. You also need to look at, I do all this with spreadsheets because I'm a very spreadsheety person. So I have like a list of publishers under different categories of who publishes what. And then I will go on their website and see when they're open for submissions, because some people will only have like a 2-month window every year and then spend the rest of the year publishing what comes out of that. So you contact them in that window, wait for a response. If you don't get one, then you don't get one. But if you do and it's a rejection, then cancel them off and go to the next one. Another piece of advice on that, don't blanket contact people, because you kind of have to play the game a bit here, but every publisher kind of likes to think that they're your first choice. So if you've contacted 50, they do talk to each other. So that kind of shows that you don't give a crap who publishes it, and none of them wants to think that. I mean, really, you probably don't ultimately, but they like to think that they're your first choice. So only write to 2 or 3 at once. If you get rejections from all of them, then do another 3, and so on. And yet this is what scares a lot of people, this is going to take a long time. For me, finishing my first proper to be published novel, which wasn't the first thing I wrote because I did a lot of practice books, but the first thing I wrote to be published was Nick and Nave. For me, finishing it to actually getting it published and available on the shelf was about 5 years.
Oh,
so,
wow.
If you're wanting to do this properly, it is going to take a long time, which is why a lot of people go down the self-publishing route, which is fine. But the temptation with that is that you start cutting the corners. You don't get it edited as well as you could. You don't get it proofed as well as it could. You don't spend the money on the front cover that you could. And you end up with a shoddy product. And ultimately, there are now infinitely more books in existence than people could ever hope to read in their lifetime. So if you're wanting someone to spend, hours of their time on your product, you owe it to them to make sure that it is as good as it can be. So whether you're doing it self-published or not, you ought to be spending the same amount of time making sure it's good as it could be as you would if it does have to go through all those gates of the traditional publishing method, if you like. But that's what scares a lot of people, because I think we're in this kind of world now with, it kind of started with talent shows like X Factor and that kind of thing, but it's even more so now with things like TikTok and that, where someone spends 5 minutes and, oh, I'm famous. And the idea that thing you want to achieve might take you 5 years from you starting writing your story to walking into a bookshop and seeing it, that puts people off.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a justified response to be scared by that, but the important message is it can work and it's worth it.
It is, yeah, it absolutely is, because you want to feel like it's so much more satisfying if you've put that work in and you get the end result, because you have to. Writing is something that's a lot. The actual act of writing isn't that fun. That's the other thing. Like if you want to be a singer, standing up on stage, actually singing is great. That's fun. It's an endorphin rush. It's great. But sitting and typing away at a computer for 7 hours, that isn't actually an enjoyable activity.
I
but
can definitely confirm that it is not fun.
It's not. It's really not. But the enjoyment comes from people reading that and what comes afterwards. But that means you have to do the bit that isn't fun. And when people hear that I'm a writer, or when I've been in Waterstones and I've said, look, that's my book there, people will be like, oh, I wish I could do that. And what they mean is they want to walk into Waterstones and see the book on the shelf. They don't want to do all the stuff that comes first.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of people off. But I don't think it's a bad thing that puts a lot of people off, because that's kind of separating the men from the boys, if you like, in terms of, have you actually got what it takes to do this? Because it's not as easy as you think it is. I hate phrases like, oh, everyone's got a book in them, because they haven't. It's not that simple. There's a lot more to it than that. The dedication and the sheer boredom that you got to put yourself through sometimes to get to that point.
Well, that was honestly a very complex and detailed and informative answer. And you've taught me a couple of things about getting published too.
I know it's not a fun answer. I know it's not a fun answer, but that is the honest, I'm not going to bullshit and say that, oh, you'll have it published in 2 weeks or anything, because, that's just kind of the fluffy, positive, yeah, look at this picture of someone stood in front of a waterfall sort of thing. And I don't do that. I tend to be honest with people.
Well, I think as well, I think it gives a lot of answers for people who genuinely want to know. So I hope anyone watching this, if you had answers on how to get published, that has just been answered for you. So you've got your book coming out this Friday, 29th of January. So it does seem a little preemptive to already ask, but do you have anything else in the works? So you've got a book coming out. Are we moving on to the next thing already?
Yeah, I'm always kind of several books ahead of myself, because I don't like feeling like it's been rushed, because I worry that would kind of dampen my creativity. Like that, for musicians, you get that second album thing where they've spent like 10 years on that first one and it's brilliant, but then they've suddenly got 18 months to do the next one, and the second album ends up being crap as a result. I don't ever want to be doing that, because I'm very passionate about the quality of what I give to people. So I'm always several books ahead. So like the next thing I've got published is already published, and it was meant to be released last Christmas, but then obviously COVID happened, and it's actually the biggest publishing deal I've managed to land. It's with a much larger firm than I've been with before. I was supposed to be doing the launch event at a Waterstones branch, and I was meant to be doing some signing tours there and all of this, and then none of that happened because of the COVID situation.
Yeah.
I know. I was even supposed to be doing something at Edinburgh Book Fair to talk about it and all that kind of thing, which was a new thing for me. I've never done anything like that. But I've kind of adopted a policy of however uncomfortable it is, just say yeah. It's a bit of advice I read from something David Bowie said once, which is where if you get offered an opportunity just that seems outside your comfort zone, just say yeah, and then you can learn how to swim once you're in the water, sort of thing. And it's like I kind of agree with that. So I was doing all of this, and then it didn't happen. So my publisher said, "Do you want to just release it anyway, or do you want to delay it a year and still do it properly with all of this stuff?" And I said, look, I've never had the opportunity to do all of this kind of stuff, so I would rather wait.
Oh, 100%.
So, yeah. So that's what we're doing. So, but that is the first book in a series of it's either 6 or 7. It depends how I wrap up the last one, to be honest. But it's a series that I've been working on since about 2008, and I've written the first 3 books already. And it's kind of like, that's my baby, if you like, this project. It's the biggest thing I've ever written, and I've been massively into it for a long time, and I keep coming back to it in between other things. And that one is it. The first book is called The Final Case Book of Mortimer Grimm, and it's set in late Victorian London. So at that slight crossover period where you just start getting cars and you just start getting electric lights and that kind of thing, but there's still gas lamps and foggy streets, and that slight crossover period. And I always like that. It's one of the reasons I liked the Red Dead Redemption game, where you're at the end of the Wild West. And I think it kind of gives it this slightly melancholy feel, where it's still got some of the traits that are famous in that era, but also you're seeing the kind of the death of them as well. And I always like that. I think that gives a good atmosphere. So it's set in that era, and it follows this detective who he can see stuff that other people can't see, so ghosts and demons and that kind of thing, but he doesn't like it. He was raised Catholic, and even though he's not Catholic himself, he's very sort of fiercely rejecting of all of that, and he hates it. So he spent most of his life either drunk or otherwise intoxicated, because he's discovered that blocks it out. But then something happens at the very beginning of the book where he is forced to use that ability to help somebody, and that completely changes his mindset on it. So he then decides, I want to learn how to use this. So he seeks out somebody who can help him. So he finds the London's most famous occultist, who is this guy named Mortimer Grimm, and he discovers that Grimm himself is actually dead and is a ghost, but the Harkins, who's the main character, can see him. And he says, okay, I will help you solve the case that got you killed, so that you can sort of move on and, you know, rest in peace, or wherever ghosts go. And in return, you're going to teach me everything that you know about this sort of secret side to London and the occult stuff that goes on here. So the two of them kind of set off doing various things throughout London, culminating in returning to the case that got Grimm killed in the first place. And that's the first book. But then it kind of goes on after that and branches off into different characters and various things. But that's the first one. And that was meant to be out in last year. It will now hopefully be out end of this year, depending what happens with the COVID situation.
That honestly sounds amazing. So if horror isn't my viewer's cup of tea, which I highly doubt that wouldn't be the case, but if it isn't, you've got something else to look forward to. And very quickly, is there anywhere where we can follow your work then? So like you said, we can find you on Amazon and Waterstones, we can find your books there, but what if we want to follow you?
Well, I do a lot of stuff like on Twitter with regards to sharing stuff that I'm involved with, but also a lot of other writers' work, and I answer questions for people there and that kind of thing. And I'm there at Lex H Jones, and yeah, Twitter's quite good for that, because you can just immediately interact with people. And it's not. I tend to keep Facebook for the more personal stuff, whereas Twitter's good for the immediate questions and business stuff and that kind of thing as well. So Twitter's a good place for that, I think.
Yeah, Twitter's a great networking place, to be fair. And is there anything else that I've missed that you wanted to discuss?
Oh God, I'm currently working with a friend of mine who's a much more established author than me on a film script that we're going to be sending to a few places.
That's
so
exciting.
I can't really say much about it beyond that, to be honest. But yeah.
Then why tease us with it?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think what I can say, and everything I think of, I'm like, no, I can't say that. But yeah, that's he wanted to write it, and he'd read some of my work, and he wanted me to be involved with it. So we've ended up sort of co-writing the whole thing, really. But that's the sort of thing, you see. I've never written a film script before. I've never written anything that isn't just to be read as a book. But I got asked, and I thought, you know what, I'll say yeah, and then I'll learn how to do it, because you don't get asked to do stuff like that very often. So I think it's much better to sort of step outside that comfort zone and discover that, I've jumped in the deep end here, but I actually can swim. That's better than not even daring to stick your toe in. So that was one of those, really. But yeah, that's. I mean, I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but it's something that's worth trying, and he's got a lot of good contacts in that. So
fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Oh no, that sounds so exciting, and I'm very annoyed I can't hear more about it.
I can tell you personally, but I can't tell you on your interview.
Right, on this note, the interview's over. No, but genuinely, thank you so much for joining me today and helping me get my toe back in the YouTube water as well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad I could.
And viewers, thank you for sticking around, because I know I've been away for a while. But yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Say goodbye to people.
Bye.
I forgot how to end a YouTube
I
video.
know, what do you do?